At our 5-year anniversary dinner, my husband Arnold looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know, Margaret, Lara was the one that got away. If she hadn't moved to London, I never would have settled for this." I smiled, raised my wine glass, and said simply, "How interesting." 3 weeks later, Arnold was on a one-way flight to London, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a maxed-out credit card. Lara Harrington wasn't exactly thrilled to see him, but let me start from the beginning, because the devil, as they say, is in the details.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The Venetian restaurant had always been our place. Arnold Ballard had proposed to me there 6 years ago, kneeling beside table 12, while a violinist played something romantic and expensive. The same table where we now sat every year on October 15th, celebrating another year of what I'd foolishly believed was marital bliss. The restaurant hadn't changed much. Still the same crystal chandeliers casting warm light over couples murmuring sweet nothings across white tablecloths. Still the same soft jazz playing in the background, the kind that made conversations feel intimate even when you were discussing grocery lists. But something about Arnold had changed over the past few months, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what. He'd been distant, preoccupied, always checking his phone with this secretive little smile that made my stomach turn. When I asked about it, he'd brush me off with that charming laugh of his. "Just work stuff, babe. You wouldn't understand the technical details." Arnold worked in software development, and he'd made a career out of making me feel stupid about anything involving computers, coding, or really any aspect of his professional life. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was about us, about celebrating half a decade of marriage, about remembering why we'd chosen each other in the first place. I'd even bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald green that brought out my eyes. Arnold had barely glanced at it when I came down the stairs. "You look nice," he'd said, not looking up from his phone. Nice. Like I was a pleasant wallpaper pattern, or a well-arranged flower bouquet. Now sitting across from him at our anniversary table, I watched him scroll through his phone with that same distracted expression he'd been wearing for weeks. The waiter had already brought our wine, a bottle of Chianti, that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Arnold had ordered it without consulting me, just like he ordered my meal, just like he made most decisions that affected both of us. "Could you put the phone away?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "It's our anniversary." Arnold glanced up, irritation flashing across his features. "I'm handling something important, Margaret. Can you give me just a minute?" A minute stretched into 5, then 10. Around us, other couples were laughing, sharing stories, celebrating whatever milestones had brought them to this expensive restaurant on a Tuesday night. But at our table, silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. I studied my husband's face in the candlelight. When had the laugh lines around his eyes become so pronounced? When had his jaw taken on that permanent clench of someone perpetually annoyed with the world? Arnold was still handsome, 34 years old, with the kind of sharp features that looked good in professional headshots, but there was something hollow about him now, something that made me feel like I was dining with a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Remember when we used to talk?" I said finally. That got his attention. Arnold set down his phone with the exaggerated patience of someone dealing with a particularly slow child. "We're talking now." "No, we're not. You're managing me. There's a difference." Arnold's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw something that looked almost like genuine emotion cross his features. But it wasn't affection or even recognition. It was pity. "Margaret," he said, his voice taking on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. "You've been acting strange lately. Needy. It's not attractive." The words hit me like a physical blow. Needy, for wanting to have a conversation with my own husband on our anniversary, for expecting basic courtesy from the man who'd promised to love and cherish me until death do us part. I'm not being needy, I said carefully. I'm being a wife. Arnold laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right, a wife. He picked up his wine glass and took a long sip, studying me over the rim like I was an interesting specimen in a laboratory. You know what the problem is, Margaret. You think this is enough. You think showing up and being present is all it takes. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're comfortable. You're settled. You've stopped trying to be the woman I fell in love with. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, too close. The jazz music that had seemed romantic minutes earlier now sounded like background noise in a movie where something terrible was about to happen. The woman you fell in love with, I repeated slowly. Arnold nodded, warming to his theme now like a professor delivering a lecture he'd given many times before. When we met, you had ambition. You were working on that marketing degree, talking about starting your own business. You had fire. But now, he gestured vaguely at me, as if my current existence was self-explanatory. Now you're just comfortable. I felt something cold settling in my chest. I finished my degree. I got a job at Harrison and Associates. I've been promoted twice. A marketing coordinator at a mid-tier firm, Arnold said dismissively. That's not ambition, Margaret. That's settling. The waiter appeared at our table, probably drawn by the tension radiating from our corner of the restaurant. How are we doing here? Ready to order. Arnold didn't even glance at the menu. The lady will have the salmon, no sauce. I'll take the ribeye, medium rare. He handed both menus back to the waiter without asking what I wanted, just like always. When we were alone again, I leaned forward. Arnold, what's really going on here? This isn't about my job or my ambition. Something's changed. For a moment his mask slipped entirely. I saw something raw and almost vulnerable cross his features. But when he spoke, his words cut deeper than any knife. You know what, Margaret? You're right. Something has changed. I've been thinking a lot lately about roads not taken, about choices I made when I was younger, and didn't know any better. What kind of choices? Arnold took another sip of wine, and when he looked at me again, his eyes held a distance that made my blood run cold. You know, Margaret, Lara was the one that got away. If she hadn't moved to London, I never would have settled for this. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. The silence that followed Arnold's words was deafening. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance, servers gliding between tables, wine glasses clinking, couples lost in their own private worlds. But at our table, time seemed to have stopped entirely. Settled, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Arnold didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. If anything, he seemed relieved to have finally said what he'd apparently been thinking for months. Don't take it personally, Margaret. It's just the truth. Sometimes life forces you to make practical choices instead of following your heart. I was a practical choice. 5 years of marriage, and I was a practical choice. The waiter returned with our salads, setting them down with the kind of professional discretion that suggested he'd witnessed more than a few relationship meltdowns over the years. I stared at the mixed greens Arnold had ordered for me, no dressing, because he'd decided years ago that I needed to watch my figure, and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Tell me about Lara, I said quietly. Arnold's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What about her? You brought her up, on our anniversary, in the middle of telling me I was a consolation prize, so tell me about her. For the first time all evening, Arnold's expression softened. Not with affection for me, but with something that looked dangerously close to longing. Lara Harrington was extraordinary. We dated senior year of college. She was studying international business.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Spoke 3 languages fluently, had this incredible laugh that could light up an entire room. I noticed he was using past tense, like she was dead instead of simply living in another country. What happened? She got offered a position with a consulting firm in London right after graduation. Big money, incredible opportunity. She asked me to come with her. Arnold set down his fork and stared past me, lost in memories that didn't include me. I was young, scared. I had a good job offer here. My family was here. I thought we could make long-distance work. But you couldn't. She tried for about 6 months. But Lara wasn't the type to wait around for someone who wasn't willing to chase her across an ocean. She was meant for bigger things than a small-town software developer who was too scared to take risks. The way he said it made my stomach turn. Like chasing Lara would have been brave and romantic, while marrying me had been the coward's way out. So you met me on the rebound. Not exactly on the rebound, Arnold said, though his tone suggested that was exactly what had happened. I met you 2 years later at that conference in Seattle. You were working for that little marketing firm, remember? You seemed steady, reliable. The kind of woman who wouldn't abandon everything for some adventure on another continent. Steady, reliable. The kind of words you use to describe a good car or a dependable appliance. Not the woman you'd chosen to spend your life with. You make it sound like I was the safe option, I said. Arnold finally looked directly at me, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than anger or even contempt. It was indifference. You were the safe option, Margaret, and for a while I convinced myself that was what I wanted. Someone who would be content with a normal life, a normal marriage, normal everything. And now I realize that settling for safe might have been the biggest mistake of my life. I thought about our early relationship, trying to see it through this new horrible lens. Arnold had swept me off my feet with expensive dinners and weekend getaways, but looking back, I could see how calculated it had all been. He'd love-bombed me for 6 months, then gradually started shaping me into his ideal of what a wife should be. The career advice that had slowly steered me away from my dreams of starting my own agency. You're so good at working within established systems, babe. Why rock the boat? The subtle comments about my appearance that had led to a complete wardrobe overhaul. You'd look so sophisticated in navy. That bright red is a bit much. The way he'd gradually isolated me from friends he deemed too dramatic or bad influences. I'd thought he was helping me become a better version of myself. Now I realized he'd been methodically erasing everything about me that reminded him of what he'd given up when he let Lara Harrington slip away. Do you still talk to her? I asked. Arnold's cheeks flushed slightly. We reconnected on LinkedIn a few months ago. Professional networking, you know how it is. LinkedIn, right. Because nothing said professional networking like the way his face had been glowing while he stared at his phone for the past 3 weeks. What does she do now? She's a senior partner at Whitfield International, one of the top consulting firms in Europe. She specializes in helping companies expand into new markets. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. She's exactly where I always knew she'd end up. Married. Divorced last year. Her ex-husband couldn't handle how driven she was, apparently. Some men are intimidated by successful women. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Arnold was criticizing Lara's ex-husband for being intimidated by her success while simultaneously telling me I wasn't ambitious enough to hold his interest. She sounds amazing, I said flatly. She is. Arnold didn't even pretend to hear the sarcasm in my voice. You know what she said when we first started talking again. She said she'd always wondered what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to follow her to London all those years ago. My hand tightened around my wine glass. And what did you tell her? The truth. That I'd spent the last 5 years wondering the same thing. There it was. 5 years of marriage reduced to a footnote in Arnold's great regret story. 5 years of building a life together, supporting his career moves, putting his needs first, trying to be the wife he wanted me to be. All of it meaningless because I wasn't Lara Harrington. Does she know about me? I asked. Arnold had the grace to look uncomfortable for the first time all evening. She knows I'm married. We keep things professional. I'm sure you do. Don't be like that, Margaret. Nothing's happened. We're just talking. About old times, about careers, about what might have been. What might have been. The four most dangerous words in the English language, especially when spoken by a married man about his ex-girlfriend. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man who'd shared my bed for 5 years, who'd promised to love and cherish me, who'd built a life with me that he now dismissed as settling. When had his love become conditional on my ability to measure up to a ghost? Arnold, I said carefully, what exactly are you telling me here? He set down his wineglass and leaned back in his chair, studying me with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. I'm telling you that I think we've both outgrown this marriage. You deserve someone who thinks you're enough exactly as you are. And I deserve a chance to see what I might have had if I'd made different choices when I was younger. The words hit me like a physical blow, but what hurt most was how rehearsed they sounded. Like he'd been practicing this speech in front of his bathroom mirror for weeks. You want a divorce? I want us both to be honest about what this really is. We're roommates who share a mortgage and a last name. When's the last time you felt genuinely excited to see me walk through the door? The terrible thing was, he wasn't entirely wrong. But I'd attributed our growing distance to normal marital evolution, the natural settling that happened when passion transformed into partnership. I'd never imagined he was comparing every moment of our life together to some idealized version of what he could have had with someone else. So this is it? I asked. 5 years, and you're ready to throw it all away for a fantasy. The restaurant seemed to fade around the edges as Arnold's words sank in. Lara's been asking questions, not just reminiscing about old times or catching up on career developments. She was actively inquiring about his current life, which meant she was interested in potentially disrupting it. What kind of questions? I asked. Though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Arnold's expression brightened in a way it hadn't when he looked at me in months. She asked if I was happy, if I felt fulfilled, if I ever regretted not taking more risks when I was younger. He paused, swirling the wine in his glass like he was savoring both the vintage and the memory. She told me she thinks about that last night we spent together before she left for London. How different things might have been if I'd had the courage to follow my heart instead of playing it safe. Each word felt like a small knife twisting in my chest. Not just because of what he was saying, but because of the way he was saying it, with more passion and enthusiasm than I'd seen from him in years. This was the Arnold I'd fallen in love with. Animated and alive, just not for me. And what did you tell her? The truth. That I've spent 5 years building a life that looks perfect on paper but feels like settling for less than I deserved. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with something that looked almost like fever. Do you know what she said to that? I shook my head, though every instinct I had was screaming at me to stop this conversation before it went any further. She said she'd always wondered if I was the one that got away for her too. That she'd never found anyone who understood her ambition the way I did. That maybe we both made a mistake letting practical considerations override what we felt for each other. The irony was staggering. Arnold was telling me about a woman who'd left him for her career while simultaneously criticizing me for not being ambitious enough. But pointing out logical inconsistencies had never been effective with Arnold. He had a gift for rewriting history to support whatever narrative made him feel best about his choices. So you've been having an emotional affair, I said quietly. Arnold's jaw tightened. It's not an affair, Margaret. It's two old friends reconnecting and being honest about their feelings. Something we apparently never learned how to do. We're being honest right now. No, we're not. You're sitting there pretending this is shocking news, but you have to have felt it too. The distance, the lack of connection, the way we've been going through the motions for months. Arnold reached across the table and covered my hand with his, the first physical contact he'd initiated all evening. We're both unhappy, Margaret. At least I'm willing to admit it. His touch felt cold, perfunctory. Like he was checking off a box marked console the wife in some manual for how to conduct a civilized breakup. I pulled my hand away. I wasn't unhappy, I said. I thought we were going through a rough patch. I thought marriage required work, and we just needed to put in more effort. That's the difference between us, Arnold said with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. You think love should be work. I think it should be effortless, exciting, the kind of connection that makes you want to chase someone across an ocean. And you think you have that with Lara. I know I did once, and I think we could again if we both had the courage to try. The waiter appeared with our entrees, setting down Arnold's perfectly cooked ribeye and my unsauced salmon with the kind of timing that suggested he'd been watching our table for signs of domestic tranquility. The food looked beautiful and expensive, but I couldn't imagine eating a single bite. So what's your plan? I asked when we were alone again. Divorce me and fly to London to win back your college girlfriend. Arnold cut into his steak with surgical precision. It's not that simple, obviously. There are logistics to consider. The house, our finances, how to handle things professionally. He took a bite and chewed thoughtfully. But yes, eventually, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. Eventually. Like divorcing me was an item on his to-do list, somewhere between getting his car inspected and updating his LinkedIn profile. The casual certainty in his voice was more devastating than anger would have been. Have you told her about your plans? We've discussed hypotheticals. She's been very encouraging about the idea of major life changes. She says she learned from her divorce that life's too short to stay in situations that don't fulfill you. I wondered what Lara's ex-husband would think about that philosophy. Probably the same thing I was thinking, that it was easy to be supportive of someone else's major life changes when you weren't the collateral damage. When did you decide this? I asked. Arnold paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Decide what? That our marriage was over. That I wasn't enough. That you'd rather blow up everything we've built together for a chance with someone you haven't seen in 5 years. It wasn't a decision, Margaret. It was a realization. A gradual understanding that I'd been lying to myself about what I wanted out of life. He set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying me with detached curiosity. The truth is, I think I knew on our wedding day that I was making a mistake. The words hit me like a physical blow. Our wedding day. The day I'd thought was the happiest of both our lives. Arnold had seemed nervous, but I'd attributed that to normal pre-ceremony jitters. Now I was realizing he'd been having second thoughts about marrying me while I was walking down the aisle toward him. Then why did you go through with it? Because I thought I could learn to be content with content. I thought maybe wanting something safe and predictable was a sign of maturity. Arnold picked up his wine glass and studied the deep red liquid like it held answers to questions he'd been asking himself for years. But you can't build a life on settling, Margaret. Eventually, the compromises start to feel like sacrifices, and the sacrifices start to feel like prison sentences. So I've been your prison sentence for 5 years. Don't be dramatic. You've been my attempt at conventional happiness. It's not your fault that conventional isn't enough for me. The patronizing tone in his voice made my vision blur with rage. Not my fault, but my problem. Not his failure to appreciate what we'd built together, but my inadequacy in comparison to his fantasy of what life could have been with someone else. "Arnold," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest, "are you telling me that our entire marriage has been you settling for second best?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes. One word. 3 letters. 5 years of my life reduced to a consolation prize I'd never known I was competing for." Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance of romance and celebration. Couples toasting anniversaries, sharing desserts, making memories they'd treasure for years to come. But at our table, the careful fiction of our marriage was finally completely crumbling. "Well," I said, setting down my napkin with hands that were surprisingly steady, "thank you for finally being honest." Arnold looked almost relieved. "I'm glad we can handle this like adults, Margaret. I was worried you might make things difficult." I smiled for the first time all evening, though I doubt Arnold would have found it comforting if he'd been paying closer attention. "Oh, Arnold, I'm going to make things very easy for you." "Good. I think we can handle the divorce proceedings fairly smoothly if we both approach this rationally." "I agree completely. In fact, I think you should chase your dream. Life's too short for regrets, don't you think?" Arnold brightened, clearly pleased that I was taking the news so well. "Exactly. You understand. This is why I knew we could handle this maturely." I raised my wine glass in a mock toast, "to following your heart, no matter the cost." Arnold clinked his glass against mine, completely missing the edge in my voice. "To new beginnings." The ride home was silent except for the hum of Arnold's BMW and the occasional ping of his phone receiving messages. Each notification made him smile in a way that used to be reserved for me, and I found myself cataloging these small betrayals like evidence in a case I wasn't sure I wanted to build yet. Our house in Maplewood looked exactly the same as it had when we'd left for dinner 2 hours ago, but everything felt different now. The carefully coordinated furniture we'd chosen together, the wedding photos lining the hallway, the kitchen where we'd shared countless meals, all of it felt like props in a play that had been running too long with actors who'd forgotten their original motivation. Arnold headed straight for his home office, phone already pressed to his ear. "Hey, it's me," I heard him say as he closed the door behind him. The casual intimacy in those 3 words told me everything I needed to know about who was on the other end of that call. I stood in our living room, still wearing the emerald dress I'd chosen so carefully for our anniversary dinner, and tried to process what had just happened. 5 years of marriage dismissed as settling. 5 years of building a life together, reduced to a practical choice Arnold regretted making. 5 years of loving a man who'd apparently been comparing me to a ghost the entire time. The smart thing would have been to call my sister Kate, or my best friend Angel, to seek comfort from people who actually valued my existence. But I wasn't ready for their sympathy or their outrage on my behalf. I wasn't ready to say the words out loud yet. "My husband is leaving me for his ex-girlfriend." Instead, I walked through our house like I was seeing it for the first time. The living room with its neutral palette that Arnold had insisted would be timeless and sophisticated. The dining room where we entertained his colleagues and no one else, because my friends were apparently too unprofessional for his standards. The master bedroom with its king-sized bed where we'd been sleeping on opposite sides for months without acknowledging the growing distance between us. I stopped in front of our wedding photo on the mantel. I looked radiant in my white dress, genuinely happy in a way that seemed almost naive now. Arnold looked handsome in his black tuxedo, but studying his expression with new eyes, I could see what I'd missed then. The smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The slight tension in his shoulders. The look of a man going through the motions of what he thought he should want rather than what he actually did. Had I been blind, or had I simply chosen not to see? From his office, I could hear Arnold's voice rise and fall in animated conversation. He was probably telling Lara about our anniversary dinner, about how well I'd taken the news, about how smoothly things were going to proceed. The thought made my stomach turn. I found myself thinking about our early relationship, re-examining moments I'd treasured through this new awful lens. The way Arnold had love-bombed me for the first 6 months, expensive dinners, surprise weekend trips, constant attention of affection. I'd thought I was experiencing the romance of a lifetime. Now I realized I'd been experiencing the courtship of a man trying to convince himself he could be happy with his second choice. The gradual changes had been so subtle I'd barely noticed them happening. The way he'd started choosing my outfits for important events, claiming he had better taste than I did. The career advice that had slowly steered me away from my dreams of starting my own marketing agency. "You're so talented at working within established systems, babe. Why take unnecessary risks?" The way he discouraged friendships with people he deemed too dramatic or bad influences. I'd thought he was helping me become a more refined version of myself. Now I understood he'd been systematically erasing everything about me that didn't fit his idealized vision of what a wife should be. And apparently, even after all that molding and shaping, I still wasn't enough to make him forget about Lara Harrington. The worst part was how rational he'd made it all sound. Life's too short for regrets. Following your heart. Being true to yourself. All perfectly reasonable philosophies that happen to require destroying someone else's life to implement. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, not the expensive stuff Arnold preferred, but the bottle of rosé I kept hidden behind the olive oil for moments when I needed something that was just mine. It tasted like rebellion and possibility. Through the kitchen window, I could see our neighbor Freddie Willows working in his garden under the porch light. Freddie was 73 years old and had been married to the same woman for 45 years. I'd always admired their relationship, the way they still held hands when they walked their dog, the way they laughed together over morning coffee on their front porch. I'd thought Arnold and I might have something like that someday. Now I wondered if Freddie had ever looked at his wife and thought about the one that got away. If every marriage contained these hidden fault lines, these secret comparisons to roads not taken. Arnold's voice carried from his office, punctuated by laughter I recognized as genuine. He sounded happier talking to Lara than he had in months of conversations with me. The realization should have been devastating. But instead I felt something else settling in my chest, something that felt dangerously close to relief. Maybe he was right. Maybe we had both been going through the motions of a marriage that had run its course. Maybe I'd been so focused on being the wife I thought he wanted that I'd forgotten who I used to be before I met him. I thought about Margaret Holden, my maiden name, my former self. She'd been ambitious, fearless, willing to take risks that the current version of me wouldn't even consider. She'd dreamed of running her own company, traveling to places that couldn't be found in guidebooks, building a life that was entirely her own creation. When had I stopped being her? Arnold's office door opened, and he emerged looking more animated than I'd seen him in months. His hair was slightly mussed like he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes were bright with excitement. "Sorry about that," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "Important call." From Lara, he had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "We were just discussing some potential opportunities. She thinks there might be a position opening up at her firm that would be perfect for someone with my background. In London. It's worth exploring." The international market for software development is really expanding, and Lara's company specializes in helping businesses navigate those opportunities. Arnold was practically glowing as he spoke. She says I'd be perfect for it. Of course she did. Lara Harrington, the magical ex-girlfriend who validated all of Arnold's professional aspirations while I'd apparently been holding him back with my boring stability and reasonable expectations. That sounds amazing, I said, and meant it. You should definitely pursue it. Arnold's eyebrows shot up. Really? You're not going to try to talk me out of it? Why would I? You're obviously excited about the possibility. Life's too short for regrets, right? He studied my face like he was looking for signs of sarcasm or hidden anger. I'm glad you understand, Margaret. I was worried this might get complicated. Not complicated at all, I said, taking another sip of my wine. In fact, I think you should call Lara back and tell her you're definitely interested. Arnold's smile widened. You know what? I think I will. He headed back toward his office, then paused at the doorway. Margaret, I know this is a big change, but I really think this is what's best for both of us. You deserve someone who thinks you're amazing exactly as you are. You're absolutely right, I agreed. I do. As Arnold disappeared back into his office to resume his conversation with the woman who'd been the star of his secret fantasy life, I finished my wine and started making mental notes. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was crying or raging or having the emotional breakdown that probably would have been appropriate under the circumstances. Instead, I lay in bed listening to Arnold's peaceful breathing and thinking with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. He'd fallen asleep easily after his second phone call with Lara, murmuring something about exciting possibilities before rolling over and drifting off without so much as a goodnight kiss. The casual dismissal might have hurt yesterday. Tonight it felt like freedom. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and padded quietly to the kitchen. The house felt different in the darkness, less like a home I'd helped build, and more like a stage set I'd been performing on without realizing it. I made coffee and sat at our breakfast bar, looking out at the suburban street where we'd planned to raise children, grow old together, build the kind of stable life that people envied. None of that was going to happen now. Arnold had made that clear. But as I sipped my coffee and watched the first hints of dawn creep across the sky, I realized something that should have been devastating, but instead felt like waking up from a long dreamless sleep. I didn't want that life either. Not anymore. When had I stopped dreaming? When had I started measuring success by how well I could anticipate Arnold's needs and preferences? When had I become so focused on being the perfect wife that I'd forgotten what I actually wanted from my own life? I thought about Margaret Holden, the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Arnold Ballard. She'd been 27 when we met, working 60-hour weeks at a small marketing firm, while developing a business plan for her own agency. She'd had a 5-year plan that included travel, professional growth, and building something entirely her own. I'd abandoned that plan 6 months after meeting Arnold, convinced that love meant compromise and that his vision of our future was better than mine. He'd been so confident, so sure about what would make us both happy. It had been easier to follow his lead than to fight for dreams he considered impractical. But Margaret Holden wouldn't have been impressed by a man who saw her as a consolation prize. She wouldn't have spent 5 years molding herself into someone else's idea of perfection. She would have walked away the moment she realized she was being compared to a ghost. Maybe it wasn't too late to find her again. As the sun rose, I made a mental inventory of everything in my life that was truly mine versus everything that was ours or his. The results were depressing. Most of our furniture reflected Arnold's taste. Our social circle consisted primarily of his colleagues and their wives. Even my wardrobe had been gradually influenced by his preferences until I barely recognized my own style. But I still had my job, modest though Arnold considered it. I still had my own bank account, though I'd been contributing most of my salary to our joint expenses. I still had friends from before our marriage, even if I'd let those relationships languish under Arnold's subtle disapproval. Most importantly, I still had the business plan I'd written all those years ago, hidden in a box in our garage along with other remnants of the woman I used to be. The marketing agency I'd dreamed of starting, the clients I'd wanted to work with, the creative campaigns I'd envisioned, all of it was still there, waiting. Arnold's alarm went off at 6:30, same as every morning. He stumbled to the shower without acknowledging my presence in the kitchen, probably already thinking about when he could call Lara again. The time difference meant it was already afternoon in London, prime time for international romance. I made him coffee the way he liked it, black, no sugar, and set it on the counter where he'd find it. Such a small gesture, but it felt significant somehow. Possibly the last time I'd anticipate his needs without being asked. "Thanks, babe," he said when he emerged from the shower, already reaching for his phone. "I might be late tonight. Big presentation to prep for." Sure he did. The presentation probably involved discussing his future with the woman who'd been occupying his thoughts for months. "No problem," I said. "I'm thinking about going out myself anyway." Arnold glanced up from his phone, mildly surprised. "Out where?" "I thought I might call Angel. See if she wants to grab dinner and catch up." Angel Harrington, no relation to Lara, despite the surname, had been my best friend since college. She was also everything Arnold disapproved of in a woman: loud, opinionated, successful on her own terms, and completely uninterested in making herself smaller to accommodate anyone else's comfort. I'd been avoiding her for months because her very existence seemed to irritate my husband. "Angel," Arnold's expression soured slightly. "I thought you two had grown apart." "We did, but maybe it's time to reconnect with old friends." Something in my tone must have caught his attention because Arnold actually looked at me directly for the first time in weeks. "You seem different this morning." "Do I?" "Yeah, more awake, I guess." "It's good. I was worried last night's conversation might have upset you." "Upset me?" Like learning that my entire marriage was a mistake was equivalent to burning dinner or missing a turn on the highway. "I'm not upset, Arnold. I'm grateful." "Grateful?" "For your honesty. You're right that we've both been going through the motions. It takes courage to admit when something isn't working." Arnold brightened, clearly pleased that I was handling his midlife crisis with such maturity. "Exactly. We're both still young enough to start over, to find what we're really looking for." "Absolutely," I agreed, refilling my coffee cup. "Life's too short to settle for anything less than extraordinary." As Arnold headed off to work, probably planning to call Lara the moment he reached his office, I pulled my laptop from its charging station and opened a new browser window. The search bar sat empty, waiting. I typed how to start a marketing agency. Then I deleted it and typed divorce lawyers in Maplewood. Then I deleted that too and typed Margaret Holden business plan. No, that wasn't right either. Finally, I typed what I was really thinking: how to disappear completely and start over. The search results filled my screen with possibilities I'd never considered. New cities, new careers, new ways of being in the world that didn't require anyone's approval but my own. That evening I sat across from Angel Harrington at Russo's, a little Italian place that Arnold had always dismissed as too noisy and ethnic for his refined palate. Angel looked exactly the same as she had in college: wild curly hair, bright red lipstick, and the kind of energy that made everyone around her sit up straighter. "So let me get this straight," Angel said, twirling pasta around her fork with theatrical precision. Prince Charming tells you on your anniversary that you're his consolation prize, and you're sitting here acting like it's good news. I'd told her everything. About Arnold's declaration of love for Lara, about his plans to pursue a job in London, about the systematic way he'd been reshaping me into his vision of an acceptable wife. Angel had listened with the kind of focused attention that reminded me why we'd been best friends in the first place. "It is good news," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "I've been sleepwalking through my own life for 5 years, Angel." He woke me up. "By telling you he settled for you. Margaret, that's not a wake-up call, that's emotional warfare." "Maybe, but it's also the truth. And I'd rather know the truth than keep living a lie." Angel studied my face with the sharp intelligence that had made her a successful criminal defense attorney by age 30. "You're planning something." It wasn't a question. Angel had always been able to read me better than anyone, including my husband, especially my husband. "I'm planning a lot of things," I said, carefully, starting with remembering who I used to be before I became Mrs. Arnold Ballard. And who was that? I thought about it seriously. Someone who took risks, someone who had her own dreams and wasn't afraid to chase them, someone who wouldn't have tolerated being anyone's second choice. "I remember her," Angel said softly. "She was pretty incredible. What happened to her?" "She fell in love with a man who convinced her that loving him meant becoming someone else." I took a sip of wine, a bold Sangiovese that would have made Arnold wrinkle his nose. "But she's still in there somewhere. I can feel her waking up." Angel leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "So what's the plan?" "Well, Arnold wants to chase his dream girl to London. I think he should absolutely do that." "You're going to let him go without a fight?" "I'm going to help him go." I smiled, and Angel's eyebrows shot up. "What? He deserves to pursue true love, doesn't he? Who am I to stand in the way of his happiness?" "Margaret Holden, you beautiful, devious bitch," Angel said with genuine admiration. "What are you really planning?" I looked around the restaurant, taking in the warm lighting, the animated conversations, the couples who seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. This was what I'd been missing: authentic connection, real laughter, the feeling of being seen and appreciated for who I actually was. "I'm planning to give Arnold exactly what he says he wants," I said. "No obstacles, no guilt trips, no desperate attempts to change his mind. Pure, enthusiastic support for his romantic quest. And what do you get out of this generous gesture? Freedom. A chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. And the satisfaction of watching someone who thinks he's so clever learn that actions have consequences." Angel raised her wine glass. "I don't know what you're plotting, but I'm here for it. What do you need from me?" "Information, mostly. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I decide how to handle it." I pulled out my phone and opened Arnold's LinkedIn profile. "Tell me what you see when you look at this." Angel studied the screen, her lawyer brain automatically cataloging details. "Software development manager at Hartwell Industries. Pretty standard corporate headshot. Decent connections, though not exactly groundbreaking." She scrolled through his recent activity. "Lots of engagement with Whitfield International posts." "That's interesting. That's Lara's company." "Ah. So he's been publicly flirting through professional networking. Classy." Angel handed back my phone. "What else do you want to know?" "Everything. I want to know about divorce law in this state. I want to know about protecting assets. I want to know about international employment law, and what happens when someone abandons their U.S. job to chase a fantasy in another country." Angel's smile widened. "Now we're talking. Margaret, honey, you've come to the right place. I may not know international law personally, but I know people who do, and I know everything about making sure cheating husbands don't walk away with more than they deserve. He hasn't technically cheated yet. Emotional affairs count, trust me." And from what you're describing, he's been emotionally checked out of your marriage for months while actively pursuing someone else. That's not a gray area. The waiter brought our entrees, and I realized I was actually hungry for the first time in weeks. The food tasted better than anything I'd eaten in Arnold's presence recently. Everything seemed more vivid, more real, like I'd been living behind a filter that had suddenly been removed. There's something else, I said as Angel attacked her chicken parmigiana with gusto. I need to understand Lara Harrington, who she really is, what she really wants, whether she's actually interested in Arnold or just enjoying the attention. You want me to investigate your husband's dream girl. I want to know what I'm working with. Arnold has spent 5 years comparing me to a fantasy version of a woman he knew in college. I'm curious about the reality. Angel nodded thoughtfully. Whitfield International is a big firm. I probably know someone who knows someone. Corporate consulting is a surprisingly small world. Perfect. But Angel, this has to stay between us. Arnold can't know I'm asking questions. Of course not. But Margaret, can I ask you something? Anything. Are you doing this for revenge, or are you doing this to protect yourself? I considered the question seriously. Both, I think. But mostly, I'm doing this because for the first time in 5 years, I feel like myself again. And Margaret Holden doesn't let people walk all over her. Angel raised her glass again. Welcome back, Margaret Holden. I've missed you. As we clinked glasses, I felt something settle into place in my chest. Not anger, not hurt, but something much more dangerous. Clarity, purpose. The calm certainty of someone who'd finally stopped pretending everything was fine and started planning what came next. Angel worked fast. Within 3 days, she'd compiled a dossier on Lara Harrington that would have impressed a private investigator. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from anywhere Arnold might accidentally run into us, and she slid a manila folder across the table like we were conducting international espionage. Your husband's dream girl is quite a piece of work, Angel said, stirring sugar into her cappuccino. But not necessarily in the way he thinks. I opened the folder and found myself looking at a professional headshot of a stunning blonde woman with sharp features and intelligent eyes. Lara looked exactly like the kind of woman Arnold would fall for, polished, sophisticated, intimidating in all the ways he found attractive. She's beautiful, I admitted. She's also ruthless. I talked to someone who worked with her at Morrison and Associates before she moved to London. According to my source, Lara Harrington doesn't just climb corporate ladders, she burns them down behind her so no one else can follow. Angel flipped to the next page, revealing what looked like a timeline of Lara's career moves. Look at this pattern. She joins a company, identifies the most valuable clients and connections, then leaves within 18 months to start her own competing firm or join a bigger player. She's done it 4 times in the past 8 years. That sounds like standard career advancement. Maybe. But check this out. Angel pointed to a newspaper clipping from the London Business Journal. 6 months ago, Lara's division at Whitfield International lost 3 major clients in a single week, all to a boutique firm that Lara had been quietly advising on the side. When confronted, she claimed she was conducting preliminary research for a potential Whitfield expansion into those markets. I studied the article more carefully. Between the lines, it painted a picture of someone who played elaborate games with other people's livelihoods. She was setting up her next move. Exactly. My source says she's been having exploratory conversations with headhunters about starting her own international consulting firm. She needs investors, partners, and most importantly, she needs people willing to take big risks for potentially big rewards. The implications hit me like a cold slap. Arnold, Angel confirmed. Think about it from her perspective. She's got a former boyfriend who's unhappy in his marriage, successful enough to have assets worth liquidating, and desperately eager to prove he's still the ambitious man she once knew. He's perfect mark for someone who needs a business partner with more enthusiasm than sense. I flipped through more pages, financial records that Angel had somehow managed to access, social media screenshots, even a few photos from Lara's recent appearances at London industry events. In every image, she looked confident, calculating, like someone who'd never made a decision that wasn't strategically motivated. "There's more," Angel said. Her divorce last year, her ex-husband was a software developer. Ring any bells? She has a type. She has a business model. According to court records, she walked away from that marriage with half of everything, including intellectual property rights to 3 software applications her ex had developed during their marriage. Applications that are now generating significant revenue for her consulting firm. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. I'd been prepared to discover that Lara was genuinely interested in Arnold, that maybe their college romance had been real enough to rekindle. But this was something else entirely. This was predatory. So when she reached out to Arnold on LinkedIn, she was probably conducting market research, seeing if he was still financially and emotionally available for her next venture. Angel leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "The question is, what are you going to do with this information?" I stared at Lara's photograph, trying to reconcile this calculated manipulator with the romantic figure Arnold had built up in his mind. He saw her as his one true love, the ambitious woman who'd gotten away. She saw him as potential capital for her next business venture. "I'm going to let her have him," I said finally. Angel's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously, even knowing what she's planning?" "Especially knowing what she's planning." I closed the folder and met Angel's confused gaze. "Arnold wants to chase his dream girl to London. I'm going to make sure he has every opportunity to do exactly that. With his full enthusiasm and complete financial commitment. Margaret, she's going to destroy him. Is she, or is she going to give him exactly what he deserves for treating his wife like a consolation prize?" I finished my coffee and gathered my things. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Angel shook her head in amazement. "You've changed. The old Margaret would have tried to warn him, to protect him even after what he did to you. The old Margaret thought her job was to save Arnold from his own poor judgment. The new Margaret thinks Arnold is a grown man who's capable of making his own choices and living with the consequences. And if those consequences include losing everything he's worked for." I thought about that as we walked to our cars. Arnold had worked hard for his success, but he'd also been willing to throw away 5 years of marriage for a fantasy. He'd systematically erased my dreams and ambitions while pursuing his own. He'd made me feel like I was never enough while pining for a woman who, it turned out, saw him as nothing more than a business opportunity. Then maybe he'll learn something valuable about the difference between fantasy and reality. I said, "Besides, I'm not the one manipulating him. I'm just not standing in his way anymore." Angel hugged me goodbye, and I could see the mix of admiration and concern in her eyes. "Be careful, Margaret. Whatever you're planning, make sure you protect yourself first." "That's exactly what I'm doing," I assured her. As I drove home, I thought about the timeline Lara was probably working with. She needed Arnold to make his move soon, before he had time to think too carefully about the risks involved. That meant she'd be escalating her romantic campaign, making him feel like time was running out on his chance for true love. Which was perfect for my purposes. The faster Arnold moved, the less time he'd have to consider the practical implications of his choices. And the less time he'd have to notice what I was doing to protect my own interests. I pulled into our driveway just as Arnold was getting home from work. He looked animated, excited, practically glowing with anticipation. His phone was pressed to his ear, and I caught fragments of his conversation as he walked toward the house. Absolutely thrilled about the opportunity. When would you need an answer? I think I can make that work. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call and pasted on the guilty smile of someone who'd been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. Hey babe, he said, kissing my cheek with more enthusiasm than he'd shown in months. How was your day? Wonderful, I said truthfully. How was yours? You seem excited about something. Arnold's smile widened. Just some interesting developments at work. Nothing concrete yet, but, well, we'll see. That sounds promising, I said, matching his enthusiasm. You know I support whatever makes you happy. As we walked into our house together, Arnold chattering about his potential opportunities, I mentally reviewed everything I'd learned about Lara Harrington. Arnold thought he was pursuing his destiny. Lara thought she was cultivating her next business partner. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work and drove to a part of town I'd been avoiding since my marriage began. The industrial district where Harrison and Associates had their offices was gray and practical, but just 6 blocks away sat the converted warehouse space I'd dreamed about renting when I was 27 and foolish enough to think I could build an empire. The for lease sign was still there. I parked across the street and stared at the building through my windshield. 3 stories of exposed brick with massive windows that would flood the interior with natural light. Ground floor retail space, upper floors perfect for creative offices. 5 years ago, I'd driven past this building every day on my way to my corporate job, imagining the agency I'd build inside those walls. Arnold had called it an expensive fantasy when I'd shown him the listing. You don't have the experience to manage that kind of overhead. Babe, maybe start smaller, work from home for a few years first. By the time I'd accumulated the experience he deemed sufficient, the dream had somehow evaporated entirely. Now, staring at those windows again, I felt something stirring that I'd thought was dead. Not just ambition, but something deeper. The absolute certainty that I was capable of more than I'd been allowing myself to imagine. I called the number on the sign. Brennan Properties, this is Kate speaking. Kate Willows turned out to be a woman about my age with an infectious laugh, and the kind of direct communication style I'd forgotten I appreciated. We met at the building 20 minutes later, and she walked me through the space with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved what she did. The previous tenant was an architecture firm, Kate explained. As we climbed to the 2nd floor, they built out some beautiful conference rooms and workspaces. Most of the infrastructure is already in place for a creative business. The space was even better than I'd imagined. High ceilings, polished concrete floors, enough room for a team of 20 with room to grow. I could picture it all. The reception area where potential clients would get their first impression. The conference room where I'd present campaigns that would make people sit up and take notice. The office where I'd build something entirely my own. What kind of business are you considering? Kate asked. Marketing agency. Full service with a focus on helping smaller companies compete with bigger firms through strategic creative campaigns. The words came out easily, like I'd been practicing them in my sleep for years. That sounds exciting. Do you have experience in the field? 7 years at Harrison and Associates, plus freelance work in college. I've been developing a business plan for well longer than I care to admit. I ran my hand along the exposed brick wall, imagining how it would look with the right artwork and lighting. I'm finally in a position to make it happen. Kate named a monthly rent that was significant but not impossible. I did quick calculations in my head. My savings, my projected income, the assets I'd be entitled to in a divorce. The numbers worked, especially if I moved quickly. I'm interested, I said. Very interested. What would you need from me to move forward? First month's rent, security deposit, and proof of financing. Standard business lease, with options to expand into the third floor if your business grows. Kate pulled out her phone to check her calendar. I could have the paperwork ready by Friday if you want to move fast. Friday, 3 days away. Arnold was supposed to have his final video call with Lara's headhunter on Thursday evening. If everything went according to his plan, he'd be giving notice at work by the end of next week. Friday works perfectly, I said. After Kate left, I spent another hour in the empty building, sitting on the dusty floor and making lists on my phone. Equipment I'd need, staff I'd want to hire, potential clients I could approach. For the first time in years, I was planning a future that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or vision. I thought about Margaret Holden's original business plan, still hidden in a box in our garage. I'd been so proud of that document. 40 pages of market research, financial projections, and creative strategies that had earned me an A+ in my graduate business course. Arnold had barely glanced at it before declaring it optimistic to the point of being unrealistic. Tonight, I'd dig out that box and see what parts of the plan were still viable. I suspected most of it was. When I got home, Arnold was already pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when I walked in, and his face was flushed with excitement. Yes, I understand the timeline. Absolutely, I'm prepared to make that commitment. Let me discuss it with my wife and get back to you by tomorrow. He hung up and turned to me with the kind of smile I hadn't seen since our wedding day. Margaret, something incredible has happened. Tell me everything, I said, settling onto the couch with genuine curiosity. Lara's firm wants to offer me a senior consultant position. They're expanding their North American operations, and they need someone with my background to help establish their new division. Arnold sat down beside me, taking my hands in his. It's everything I've ever wanted professionally. International work, cutting-edge projects, the chance to really make an impact. That sounds amazing, Arnold. What's the timeline? They'd want me to start in 6 weeks. There would be some travel back and forth initially, but eventually I'd be based primarily in London. His eyes were bright with possibility. Margaret, this could change everything for us. Even now, planning to abandon our marriage for his ex-girlfriend, Arnold was framing his escape as something we'd be doing together.
Yep.
What would that mean for me? I asked. Though I already knew the answer, Arnold's expression flickered slightly. Well, obviously it would be a big adjustment. You'd need to find a new job. We'd need to sell the house, figure out visas and international tax implications. It's a lot to consider. It is a lot, I agreed. But Arnold, if this is what you want, if this is your dream opportunity, then I think you should take it. His smile returned full force. Really, you'd be willing to make that kind of change? I'd be willing to support whatever decision makes you happiest, I said carefully. This sounds like exactly the kind of opportunity you've been waiting for. Arnold pulled me into a hug that felt more like gratitude than affection. I knew you'd understand. This is why I married you, Margaret. You always know how to see the big picture. As he held me, I thought about the building I'd just toured, the business plan I'd be updating tonight, the new life I was quietly constructing while he planned his dramatic exit. Arnold thought he was the only one with dreams worth chasing. That night, while Arnold worked late in his office finalizing details with London, I sat in our garage, surrounded by boxes I hadn't opened in years. The air smelled like dust and old dreams, but what I found in those containers was pure gold. My original business plan was even better than I'd remembered. The market analysis was still relevant. The creative strategies were ahead of their time, and the financial projections had been conservative to the point of being pessimistic. With 7 years of additional experience and the contacts I'd built at Harrison and Associates, this could actually work. But more importantly, I found documentation of everything I'd owned before marriage: bank statements, investment portfolios, Even the deed to a small rental property I'd inherited from my grandmother and forgotten about. Arnold had been so focused on building our life together that he'd never paid attention to what had been mine alone. I spread everything out on the concrete floor like a general planning a campaign, financial documents in one pile, business plans in another, legal papers in a third. By midnight, I had a clear picture of my resources and options. My phone buzzed with a text from Angel. "Coffee tomorrow. I have updates on your situation." I typed back, "Yes, and I have a business proposition for you." Angel was always saying she wanted to leave criminal defense and try corporate law. Maybe it was time for both of us to take some risks. I was putting the last box away when Arnold's office door opened. He emerged looking more energized than I'd seen him in months, practically glowing with anticipation. "Sorry I was tied up so long," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "Big developments happening fast." "Good developments, I hope." "The best. Lara thinks they can expedite the hiring process if I'm serious about moving quickly. They could have an offer letter ready by next week." Arnold sat down on the garage steps beside me, his excitement palpable. "Margaret, I know this is happening fast, but I really think this could be the fresh start we both need." We still using that word, still pretending this was about our mutual happiness rather than his midlife crisis romance. "How quickly are we talking?" I asked. "They'd want me to start in a month." "I know it's rushed, but opportunities like this don't come around often. Lara says if we don't move fast, they might offer the position to someone else." Of course she did. Nothing motivated a mark like artificial scarcity. Lara was playing Arnold like a concert pianist, and he was too intoxicated by the attention to notice the manipulation. "What would that mean practically?" I asked. "For the house, our finances, everything we've built here." Arnold waved his hand dismissively. "Details we can figure out. The important thing is not missing this chance. Lara says once I'm established with the firm, everything else will fall into place." Lara says, Lara thinks, Lara promises. Everything in Arnold's world now revolved around whatever his college girlfriend was telling him, despite the fact that she had every incentive to tell him exactly what he wanted to hear. "Have you thought about what happens if it doesn't work?" I asked carefully. "International moves are complicated. What if the job isn't what you expect, or if you have trouble adjusting?" For the first time, Arnold's enthusiasm flickered. "Why would you ask that? Are you trying to discourage me?" "I'm trying to be practical. These are big decisions with long-term consequences. I just want to make sure you've considered all the angles. Margaret, sometimes you have to take risks to get what you want. Not everything can be planned and controlled." Arnold's tone was getting sharper. "I thought you understood that this is important to me." "I do understand. That's why I think you should go." Arnold's head snapped toward me. "What?" "I think you should take the job. Follow your dreams. Chase the life you really want." I met his gaze steadily. "But I think you should go alone." The silence stretched between us like a bridge. Neither of us wanted to cross. Arnold's face cycled through confusion, relief, and something that might have been guilt. "Margaret, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time we both stopped pretending this marriage is working. You want a life I can't give you, with a woman who isn't me, and I deserve more than being someone's consolation prize." Arnold's shoulders sagged with relief so visible it was almost comical. I wasn't sure how to bring it up. I didn't want to hurt you. Too late for that, I thought. But what I said was, I appreciate that, this way we can handle everything amicably. No fighting, no bitterness, just two people recognizing that they want different things. Exactly. Arnold was warming to the theme now, probably already composing the story he'd tell Lara about his mature, understanding wife, who'd graciously stepped aside for true love. We can file for divorce before I leave for London, split everything fairly, start fresh. About that, I said carefully. Since you're the one leaving for a new life, it might make sense for me to keep the house. I'll buy out your share of the equity, of course. Arnold nodded eagerly. That makes sense. I'll need liquid capital for the move anyway. And honestly, Lara and I will probably want to find our own place once things are settled. Our own place. He was already living in Fantasyland, where he and Lara would be setting up house together like a couple from a romantic comedy. The reality was going to be quite different, but Arnold would have to discover that for himself. There's one more thing, I said. I'd prefer to handle the divorce proceedings here, under local jurisdiction. It'll be simpler than trying to coordinate internationally. Whatever you think is best, Arnold said, clearly not caring about details as long as they didn't interfere with his timeline. You're better at handling that kind of administrative stuff anyway. Administrative stuff. Like the end of our marriage was equivalent to organizing tax documents or scheduling maintenance appointments. I'll call a lawyer tomorrow, I said. Start getting the paperwork in order. Arnold leaned over and kissed my forehead with the relief of a man who'd just been granted a reprieve from execution. Thank you for understanding, Margaret. I know this isn't easy, but I really think it's what's best for both of us. As we walked back into the house together for what would be one of our last times as a married couple, I mentally reviewed my growing plan. Arnold would get his romantic adventure in London, with a woman who saw him as a business opportunity. I would get my freedom, my house, and the chance to build the agency I'd dreamed about for years. And if Lara Harrington turned out to be everything Angel's research suggested she was, Arnold would learn some very expensive lessons about the difference between fantasy and reality. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a master of strategic misdirection. While Arnold spent his evenings video chatting with Lara and his days researching London neighborhoods, I quietly put my own plan into motion with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. The divorce lawyer Angel recommended, Jason Harrington, apparently half the professional world shared that surname, was exactly what I needed. Sharp, experienced, and completely unsentimental about matrimonial assets. Your husband is making this remarkably easy, Jason said during our second meeting, reviewing the financial documents I'd provided. By initiating the separation and moving abroad for personal reasons, he's essentially abandoning the marital home and demonstrating that the dissolution is his choice. What does that mean practically? It means you have significant leverage in asset division. The house, joint accounts, retirement funds. Since he's the one choosing to leave for what amounts to a midlife crisis, you're in a strong position to retain the majority of marital assets. Jason leaned back in his chair. Especially if he's eager to finalize everything quickly to pursue this opportunity abroad. Which he was. Arnold had been dropping hints about wanting to wrap up the divorce proceedings as soon as possible, before his start date with Whitfield International. He'd even offered to sign whatever papers I thought were fair, trusting me to handle the details while he focused on planning his new life. It was almost too easy. Meanwhile, Kate Willows and I had been finalizing the lease for my agency space. The building was even better than I'd initially thought. The previous tenant had left behind high-end conference furniture and a complete technology infrastructure that would have cost me $30,000 to install myself. You're getting an incredible deal, Kate said, as we walked through the space one last time before signing. The owner is motivated to fill it quickly, and frankly, you're exactly the kind of tenant he wants. Established professional, clear business plan, Strong financial backing. Strong financial backing. That was the beautiful part. Between my personal savings, the assets I'd be retaining from the divorce, and a business loan I'd qualified for based on my employment history, I had more than enough capital to launch Holden and Associates in style. I'd already reached out to 3 former colleagues at Harrison who were unhappy with their current situation. Prince Ballard, no relation to my soon-to-be ex-husband, was a brilliant graphic designer who'd been underutilized at our old firm. Lara Willows was a project manager with an MBA and a talent for client relations who'd been passed over for promotion twice because she was too assertive. And Freddie Holden, my cousin who'd been freelancing web development, was ready for the stability of a regular salary. All 3 had expressed interest in joining a startup agency, especially one that promised creative freedom and profit-sharing opportunities. "When are you thinking of making the transition?" Prince asked when I took him to lunch at the same Italian place where Angel and I had first discussed my situation. "Sooner than you might expect," I said. "I'm planning to give notice at Harrison next week. Grand opening of Holden and Associates by the 1st of next month." Prince nearly choked on his pasta. "Next month, Margaret? That's incredibly fast. Are you sure you're ready?" "I've been ready for 7 years," I said. "I just needed the right motivation to stop making excuses." That evening, I found Arnold in the kitchen, laptop open, surrounded by printouts of London apartment listings. He looked up when I walked in, his face glowing with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners. "Look at this place," he said, turning his screen toward me. 2-bedroom flat in Shoreditch, walking distance from Lara's office. She says the neighborhood is perfect for young professionals. Young professionals. At 34, Arnold was apparently having a full identity crisis along with his midlife romantic awakening. "It looks lovely," I said, studying the listing. The rent was astronomical by our standards, nearly double our current mortgage payment. "Can you afford something like that on your new salary?" "It'll be tight at first, but Lara thinks there will be rapid advancement opportunities. And she mentioned the possibility of us splitting costs once." He trailed off, probably realizing he was discussing his future living arrangements with his ex-girlfriend while still technically married to me. "Once you're settled," I finished diplomatically. "That makes sense." Arnold's relief was palpable. "Exactly. It's all about long-term thinking." Long-term thinking, like planning to move in with a woman who was currently using him to advance her own business interests. But I wasn't going to be the one to point out the flaws in his logic. That was Lara's job now. "Speaking of long-term thinking," I said, sitting down across from him, "Jason called today. The divorce papers are ready for review." Arnold's attention immediately shifted from London real estate to legal documents. "Already? That was fast. You said you wanted to move quickly. I thought you'd be pleased." "I am. It's really happening, isn't it?" For a moment, Arnold looked almost vulnerable, like the reality of what he was doing had finally penetrated his romantic fantasy. "Margaret, are you sure this is what you want? There's no going back once we sign these." It was the first time in weeks that he'd asked what I wanted, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Now, when it was too late to matter, he was finally considering my feelings. "I'm sure," I said gently. "We both deserve to be with people who choose us first, not as consolation prizes." Arnold flinched slightly at the callback to his anniversary confession but nodded. "You're right, and Margaret, I hope you find someone who appreciates you the way you deserve." "I already have," I said, though I didn't specify that the someone was me. We spent the next hour reviewing the divorce settlement, with Arnold barely glancing at the financial details. He was so focused on his departure timeline that he signed off on asset divisions without question, trusting that I was being fair and reasonable. Which I was, technically. I was just being fair and reasonable according to my definition of those terms. not his. By the time we finished, Arnold had agreed to a settlement that left him with about 30% of our joint assets and me with everything else, including the house, most of our savings, and his half of my grandmother's rental property that he'd forgotten we jointly owned. "This looks good," he said, scrawling his signature on the final page. "When will everything be finalized?" "Jason says about 2 weeks for court approval. You'll be officially free to start your new life just in time for your move to London." Arnold smiled and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Thank you for making this so easy, Margaret. I know it can't be simple for you." "Actually," I said, squeezing back, "it's the most empowering thing I've done in years." As Arnold headed back to his laptop and his London apartment listings, I gathered the signed papers and thought about everything that would happen next. In 2 weeks, I'd be a divorced woman with her own business and complete control over her future. Arnold would be in London, probably just beginning to understand the difference between Lara Harrington's promises and her actual intentions. Arnold's last week in the United States was a whirlwind of activity that he mistook for romance, but I recognized as systematic manipulation. Lara had escalated her campaign with the precision of a military operation, flooding Arnold with urgent requests, intimate video calls, and carefully timed expressions of vulnerability. "She's been having second thoughts about us moving so fast," Arnold confided to me on Wednesday evening, pacing our living room with his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "Her divorce was really difficult, and she's scared about opening herself up to someone again." Of course she was. Nothing hooked a man like Arnold quite like a beautiful woman who needed reassurance about taking emotional risks. Lara was playing every note of his savior complex with perfect pitch. "That must be difficult for both of you," I said sympathetically. "Long-distance relationships require so much trust." "Exactly. That's why it's so important that I get to London as soon as possible. She needs to see that I'm serious about this, that I'm not going to abandon her like her ex-husband did." Arnold sat down beside me, his expression earnest. "Margaret, I hope you understand how much it means to me that you've been so supportive through all of this. Of course, your happiness is important to me." What I didn't mention was that I'd been tracking Lara's social media activity through a dummy account Angel had helped me create. While she was supposedly having vulnerable conversations with Arnold about her fear of commitment, she was also posting photos from expensive restaurants with a rotating cast of well-dressed men, who all happened to work in finance or technology. One of those men was tagged as James Morrison, managing director at Sterling Investment Group. A quick LinkedIn search revealed that James was divorced, financially successful, and had recently been featured in London Business Monthly as one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Lara Harrington was keeping her options open while encouraging Arnold to burn his bridges, but I wasn't going to be the one to enlighten him. Arnold had made his choice when he decided I wasn't enough for him. Now he could live with the consequences of that choice, whatever they turned out to be. My own preparations were proceeding flawlessly. The divorce was finalized on Thursday morning. Arnold signed the papers without reading them, too distracted by his impending departure to pay attention to legal details. By Thursday afternoon, I was officially Margaret Holden again, sole owner of our house and most of our assets. I gave notice at Harrison and Associates on Friday, citing personal circumstances that require immediate attention. My boss, who'd been losing top talent to competitors for months, barely seemed surprised. "If you ever want to freelance for us, Margaret, don't hesitate to call," he said, as I cleaned out my desk. "You're one of the best project managers we've ever had. One of the best. Not the best, not irreplaceable, just one of several competent employees who could be easily replaced." It was a good reminder of why I was making this change. Arnold's farewell party was set for Saturday night, a small gathering of his colleagues, and a few mutual friends who still thought of us as a couple. I'd insisted on hosting it at our house, ostensibly as a gesture of support for his new adventure. Actually, I wanted to control the narrative. The guest list was carefully curated. Arnold's work friends who'd always been slightly intimidated by his confidence and success. Our neighbors who'd watched our marriage from the outside and probably had their own theories about why it was ending. And most importantly, Angel, who'd promised to document everything for posterity. I spent Saturday afternoon preparing food and decorating the house, like I was celebrating Arnold's promotion rather than his abandonment of our life together. The irony was delicious. I was genuinely happy for his departure, just not for the reasons our guests would assume. Angel arrived early to help with final preparations, armed with a bottle of champagne and a knowing smile. "You look incredible," she said, studying my appearance. I'd chosen a deep blue dress that Arnold had always said was too bold for my complexion, paired with jewelry I'd bought myself rather than pieces he'd selected for me. "You're practically glowing. I feel incredible," I admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel like myself again." "And Arnold, how's he holding up?" I glanced toward the stairs, where Arnold was getting ready for his own party. "He's living in a fantasy where he's the hero of his own romantic comedy. Tomorrow he flies to London to reunite with his college sweetheart, who will welcome him with open arms and build a perfect life with him." "Poor bastard," Angel said, though she didn't sound particularly sympathetic. "You almost feel sorry for him." "Almost," I agreed. But then I remember that this is what he chose. He wanted adventure and passion, and a woman who would make him feel like the center of the universe. Now he gets to find out what that actually costs. The guests began arriving at 7, filling our house with conversation and laughter that felt more genuine than any gathering we'd hosted during our marriage. Without Arnold's constant need to control the impression we made, people seemed more relaxed, more themselves. Arnold worked the room like a politician, accepting congratulations on his new job and fielding questions about London with the confidence of someone who'd already conquered the city. He was charming, animated, clearly in his element as the center of attention. I watched him from across the room and felt something I hadn't expected: genuine fondness. Not love, not longing, but the kind of affection you might feel for a former acquaintance who was about to learn an important lesson about life. Arnold was flawed, selfish, and ultimately weak, but he wasn't evil. He was just a man who'd confused fantasy with reality and was about to pay a very high price for that confusion. As the evening progressed, and the wine flowed freely, Arnold's confidence grew more pronounced. He started dropping hints about his personal reasons for the move, the unfinished business he needed to resolve in London. Our friends exchanged glances, clearly picking up on the subtext, even if they didn't know the specific details. At 10 o'clock, Arnold tapped his wine glass and called for everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turned toward my soon-to-be ex-husband as he prepared to make what would probably be the most honest speech of his adult life. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his voice slightly thick with emotion and alcohol. "This move represents more than just a career change for me. It's about having the courage to chase the life you really want, even when that means making difficult choices." He looked directly at me as he spoke, and I smiled back with what I hoped looked like supportive understanding. "Sometimes," Arnold continued, "you reach a point where you have to choose between the comfortable path and the path that leads to who you're meant to be. I'm grateful to have people in my life who understand that some dreams are worth any sacrifice." The room erupted in applause, and several people came over to hug Arnold and wish him well. Through it all, I maintained my role as the supportive wife who was graciously letting her husband pursue his destiny. What none of them knew was that tomorrow morning, while Arnold was on a plane to London, I would be meeting with contractors to renovate my house. By the time he discovered what Lara Harrington really wanted from him, I would be running my own agency and living my own dreams. Arnold's flight to London departed at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning. I drove him to the airport in our May car, playing the role of the supportive ex-wife one final time. He was practically vibrating with excitement, checking his phone every few minutes for messages from Lara and double-checking his passport for the 20th time. "She's going to meet me at Heathrow," he said, as we pulled into the departure lane. "Can you believe it? After all these years, she's actually going to be there waiting for me." "It sounds very romantic," I said, helping him unload his suitcases from the trunk. He'd packed everything he considered essential into 3 bags, leaving behind years of accumulated possessions that apparently no longer mattered to his new identity. Arnold hugged me goodbye with genuine warmth, and for a moment I almost felt guilty about what I knew was coming. Almost. "Thank you, Margaret," he whispered against my ear. "For understanding, for making this easy, for being so mature about everything. I hope we can stay friends." "Of course," I said, squeezing him back. "Have a wonderful adventure, Arnold. I hope you get everything you're looking for." As I watched him disappear into the terminal, rolling his suitcases behind him like props from his new life, I felt something settle in my chest that might have been closure. Arnold Ballard was no longer my problem to solve, my responsibility to manage, or my failure to fix. I drove home through the quiet Sunday morning streets, past the coffee shop where we'd had our first date, past the park where he'd proposed, past all the landmarks of a life I was finally ready to leave behind. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked different somehow. Bigger, brighter, more full of possibility than it had in years. My phone was buzzing with notifications, but I ignored them until I was settled in my kitchen with coffee and the Sunday paper spread out before me. Only then did I check the messages that had been accumulating since Arnold's departure. The first was from Angel: "Operation Golden Parachute is complete. Call me when you're ready to celebrate." The second was from Kate Willows: "Contractors confirmed for tomorrow at 8 a.m. Ready to transform that space into something amazing." The third was from an unknown international number, but I recognized the country code. London. I almost deleted it without reading, assuming it was Arnold letting me know he'd arrived safely. But something made me open the message, and what I found there was far more interesting than a travel update. "Margaret, this is Lara Harrington. I believe we need to talk. Arnold has told me so much about you, and I think there might be some misunderstandings that need to be cleared up. Could you call me when convenient?" Lara stared at the message for a long moment, then started laughing. Not the bitter laughter of someone whose plans had been derailed, but the genuine amusement of someone who'd just been handed an unexpected gift. Lara Harrington wanted to talk to me. The woman who'd been systematically manipulating my ex-husband for months, who'd convinced him to abandon his marriage and move across an ocean for her, now felt the need to reach out to the wife she'd helped him discard. This was going to be even more interesting than I'd anticipated. I poured myself another cup of coffee, settled back in my chair, and started composing my response. After all, I'd always believed in being helpful when someone was trying to clean up their messes. I waited exactly 24 hours before calling Lara back, long enough for Arnold to have settled into whatever fantasy she'd initially provided him, but not so long that she'd think I was avoiding her. When I finally dialed the number, it was Monday evening in London, prime time for uncomfortable conversations. "Margaret," Lara's voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of strain underneath. "Thank you for calling me back. Of course, your message sounded urgent." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her calculating how much to reveal. "I think Arnold may have given you some incorrect impressions about the nature of our relationship." "What kind of impressions?" Another pause. "He seems to believe that we're romantically involved." That I've been encouraging him to leave his marriage to pursue a relationship with me. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. And that's not the case. Absolutely not. Margaret, I reached out to Arnold through LinkedIn because I was recruiting for a position at my firm. He's qualified, and I thought he might be interested in international opportunities. Our conversations have been entirely professional, I see. So when he told me you'd been discussing what might have been if he'd followed you to London years ago, that was his interpretation of professional networking. Lara's composure slipped slightly. Arnold has always been prone to reading more into situations than what's actually there. Even in college, he had a tendency to romanticize things. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Lara was essentially describing exactly what I'd been dealing with for 5 years. Arnold's ability to construct elaborate fantasies around minimal encouragement. Where is Arnold now? I asked. That's part of the problem. He showed up at my flat yesterday morning with his suitcases, saying you'd agreed to divorce him so we could be together. Margaret, I had no idea he was planning to leave his marriage. None of our conversations ever suggested anything like that. I bit back a smile. Arnold had arrived in London expecting his romantic reunion, only to discover that the woman of his dreams considered him a professional contact at best. The collision between fantasy and reality must have been spectacular. How did he take the news? Not well. He's been calling constantly, sending flowers, showing up at my office. He seems convinced that I'm just scared of commitment, that if he proves how serious he is about us, I'll come around. Lara's voice was getting sharper with each word. Margaret, I need you to talk to him. He won't listen to me, but he might listen to his wife. Ex-wife, I corrected gently. Our divorce was finalized last week. The silence on the other end was deafening. You're actually divorced? Lara finally asked. Oh yes. Arnold was very eager to make it official before he left for London. He said you two were planning to find a place together once he was settled. We most certainly are not. Lara's professional composure was completely gone now, replaced by barely controlled panic. Margaret, I need you to understand something. I never encouraged any of this. I never promised him anything beyond potential employment, which at this point is completely off the table. Why is it off the table? Because he's been harassing me. He's been telling people at my firm that we're in a relationship, that he left his wife for me. Do you have any idea how damaging that is to my professional reputation? Actually, I did have some idea. A successful businesswoman being accused of breaking up marriages was exactly the kind of scandal that could derail a career, particularly in conservative corporate environments. That does sound problematic, I agreed. It's worse than problematic, it's catastrophic. I've worked for years to build my reputation in this industry. Arnold is destroying everything with his delusions. Lara's voice was rising now, all pretense of professional calm abandoned. I need him to go home, Margaret. I need him to return to America, and leave me alone. I'm afraid that's not possible. What do you mean? I mean Arnold burned all his bridges here. He quit his job, sold his belongings, signed away his share of our house. He was so confident about your future together that he made sure there was nothing left to come back to. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. When Lara finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. What am I supposed to do with him? I really couldn't say, I replied cheerfully. But I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, you're such a successful, ambitious woman. I'm certain you can handle one confused ex-boyfriend. I hung up before she could respond, then sat back in my chair feeling more satisfied than I had in years. Arnold had gotten exactly what he'd asked for, the chance to chase his dream girl across an ocean, and Lara was getting exactly what she deserved for playing games with other people's marriages. Over the following weeks, I received a fascinating series of updates on Arnold's London adventure, courtesy of Angel's remarkably efficient intelligence network, and my own strategic communications with various parties. The first update came from Arnold himself, 3 days after my conversation with Lara. His email was a masterpiece of confused desperation disguised as casual optimism. "Hey Margaret, just wanted to let you know I'm settling in well here in London. There have been a few miscommunications with Lara about timing and expectations, but nothing that can't be worked out. She's been under a lot of pressure at work lately, so I think she's just being cautious about moving too fast. I'm giving her some space to sort through her feelings. Hope you're doing well back home." Arnold giving her space. The eternal refrain of men who couldn't accept that they'd fundamentally misunderstood a situation. The second update came from Angel, who'd somehow managed to connect with someone at Whitfield International through her legal network. "Your ex is becoming something of a legend over there," Angel reported during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Apparently he's been showing up at Lara's office building every day, sending elaborate flower arrangements. Even hired a mariachi band to serenade her outside her apartment. The security guards know him by name now." A mariachi band. I nearly choked on my latte. In London, I know, right? My contact says Lara had to get a restraining order just to be able to do her job without Arnold appearing every time she left the building. The irony is that his behavior has actually made her something of a sympathetic figure at work. Turns out nobody likes the crazy American who abandoned his wife and won't take no for an answer. The third update was the most illuminating. Arnold called me directly, 2 weeks after his arrival, and his voice sounded nothing like the confident man who'd boarded that plane. "Margaret, I think I may have made a mistake," he said without preamble. "What kind of mistake?" "About Lara. About everything. I think I misunderstood what she was offering." His voice was small, defeated. "She says we never had the conversations I remember having. She says I imagined the whole thing." "Did you?" There was a long pause. "I don't know anymore. Maybe I heard what I wanted to hear instead of what she was actually saying. What are you going to do?" "I was hoping. Margaret, is there any chance we could work things out? I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices, but maybe if I came home we could try couples therapy or something." The request was so pathetically predictable that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Arnold, we're divorced. I've moved on with my life. You should do the same. But I don't have anything to move on to. I don't have a job. I don't have anywhere to live. I don't even have enough money to get home. I spent everything on this move. What about Lara? Can't she help you?" Arnold's laugh was bitter. "Lara won't even take my calls anymore. Her company's legal department sent me a cease and desist letter. I'm apparently being considered for deportation if I don't stop harassing their employee." Deportation. Arnold had gone from successful software manager to potential deportee in less than 3 weeks. The trajectory was so steep it was almost impressive. "I'm sorry to hear you're struggling," I said, and meant it in the abstract way you might feel sorry for any human being facing consequences for their choices. "But this isn't my problem to solve anymore. Arnold, please Margaret. I know I don't deserve your help, but I don't have anyone else. Could you at least wire me enough money to get home? I'll pay you back somehow." "With what? You don't have a job to come back to, remember." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of everything Arnold had thrown away in pursuit of a fantasy that had never existed outside his own imagination. "I really screwed up, didn't I?" he finally whispered. "Yes," I said gently. "You really did." After I hung up, I sat in my beautifully renovated home office, surrounded by the plans and contracts for Holden and Associates, and felt something I hadn't expected: genuine peace. Not triumph, not vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd escaped a bad situation and built something better in its place. Arnold had wanted adventure and passion, and a woman who would make him feel like the center of the universe. He'd gotten exactly that, just not in the way he'd imagined. 6 months later, I received a final message from Arnold. Not a phone call or a desperate plea for help, but a short email that arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing client proposals for Holden and Associates. Margaret, I wanted you to know that I'm back in the States. I'm staying with my brother in Portland while I figure out my next steps. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I owe you an apology. Not for leaving. We both know our marriage wasn't working, but for the way I left. For making you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is, I was never enough for you. You deserved so much better than what I was capable of giving. I hope you're happy. I hope you're building the kind of life you always wanted. You always were the stronger one between us. Arnold. I read the message twice, then closed my laptop and walked to the window of my office. 3 floors below, the city hummed with activity. My city, my business, my life built exactly according to my own specifications. The apology should have felt vindicating, but instead it just felt finished, like the last page of a book I'd been ready to close for a long time. Arnold was back in America, probably learning hard lessons about the difference between fantasy and reality. Lara Harrington was presumably back to her normal life of strategic business decisions and calculated risks. And I was exactly where I belonged. Holden and Associates had exceeded every projection from my original business plan. We'd landed 6 major clients in our first quarter, hired 2 additional team members, and I'd been featured in the local business journal as one of the city's rising entrepreneurs. More importantly, I woke up every morning excited about my day. I made decisions based on my own judgment, wore clothes I chose because I liked them, ate food that made me happy. I'd rediscovered the woman who'd once believed she could build an empire, and it turned out she'd just been waiting for permission to try. Angel knocked on my office door, holding 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the satisfied expression of someone bearing good news. "Guess what arrived this morning," she said, setting 1 cup on my desk. "Tell me." "The contract from Morrison Industries. They want us to handle their complete rebranding campaign. It's the biggest account we've ever landed." I smiled, feeling that familiar rush of accomplishment that came from earning something entirely through my own efforts. "Looks like we're going to need more office space." I already called Kate about expanding into the 3rd floor. As Angel headed back to her own office, she'd left criminal law 6 months ago to become my business partner. I turned back to the window and thought about second chances. About the difference between settling for less and choosing to build more. 2 years after Arnold's departure, I stood in the lobby of the Grand Harbor Hotel, the same chain where he'd probably stayed during his disastrous London adventure, waiting for my date to arrive. But this time, I was there for entirely different reasons. James Willows, Kate's brother and a successful architect, had been persistently asking me out for months. He was nothing like Arnold, quieter, more thoughtful, someone who listened more than he spoke, and never once suggested I should change anything about myself to suit his preferences. "You look beautiful," he said when he arrived, and the way he said it made me believe he actually saw me, not some version of me he was trying to create. Over dinner, we talked about our work, our families, our dreams for the future. James had recently started his own firm, and he understood the challenges and rewards of building something from nothing. When I told him about the latest expansion plans for Holden and Associates, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. "You're incredible," he said over dessert. "The way you took a devastating situation and turned it into something amazing, that takes real courage." "It wasn't courage," I said. It was necessity. I had to choose between rebuilding my life, or letting someone else's poor choices define my future, and you chose to rebuild. I chose to remember who I was before I started trying to be who someone else wanted me to be. James reached across the table and took my hand, and the gesture felt natural, comfortable, right in a way that nothing with Arnold ever had. For what it's worth, he said, I like who you are now. I wouldn't change a single thing. The difference was striking. Arnold had seen me as a project to be improved, a rough draft that needed editing. James saw me as a complete story worth reading exactly as written. Later that evening, as he walked me to my door, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't analyzing every interaction, wondering if I was measuring up to some invisible standard. I was just being myself, and it was enough. Would you like to come in? I asked, and the invitation came from genuine desire, rather than obligation or strategy. I'd love to, James said, but only if you're sure. The fact that he asked, that he cared about my certainty rather than assuming it, told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he was. As we sat in my living room, decorated entirely according to my own taste now, talking until sunrise, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The devastation of Arnold's betrayal had forced me to rediscover my own strength, my own dreams, my own worth. I'd lost a husband who never truly saw me, and found myself in the process. The trade had been more than worth it. Arnold had been right about one thing during our last conversation. I had always been the stronger one. I just hadn't realized it until I stopped trying to make myself smaller to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. 3 years to the day, after Arnold had told me I was his consolation prize, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I was in my corner office at Holden & Associates, reviewing presentations for our newest client, when the notification appeared. Margaret, this is Arnold. I know I have no right to contact you, but I saw the article about your agency in Business Weekly, and wanted to say congratulations. You've built something incredible. I've been in therapy for the past year, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could throw away something real for something that never existed. I realize now that you were never the problem in our marriage. You were never not enough. I was just too immature to recognize what I had. I hope you can forgive me someday. Not for my sake, but for yours. You deserve to be free of any anger I caused. I'm genuinely happy for your success. You always deserved everything you've built. Arnold. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations don't deserve answers, especially when the person asking has never shown any real interest in listening to the response. Arnold's apology was more about his own healing than mine, and I'd moved far beyond needing his validation or forgiveness. The irony wasn't lost on me that he'd discovered my success through a magazine article rather than genuine connection. Even now, he was consuming my life from a distance rather than truly knowing who I'd become. I turned back to my presentation, smiling as I thought about the dinner James and I had planned for tonight, the vacation we were taking next month, the life we were building together based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Arnold had taught me an invaluable lesson, the difference between being chosen and being settled for. Now I knew what it felt like to be someone's first choice, their genuine preference, their equal partner in building something beautiful. The woman who'd once tried so desperately to be worthy of Arnold Ballard's love had evolved into someone who knew her own worth. And that knowledge was worth more than any marriage built on compromise and comparison. Some endings, I'd learned, were actually beginnings in disguise. Arnold's departure hadn't destroyed my life. It had freed me to create a better one, and I'd never looked back.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.